bad news on climate change just keeps rolling in. This week, the Conger ice shelf in Antarctica dropped after record high temperatures in Antarctica. And the UN just put out a report that says we're getting very close to being too late to turn back the tide on devastating climate change. This week on the Maine Challenge, we talk with 4 environmental advocates who are working on the Pine Tree Amendment. Andy Burt and Michelle Henkin, who have been longtime advocates on the environment, and 2 young advocates from high school, Audrey Huffnagel and Margaret Archibald, who join us to talk about their work on the Pine Tree Amendment, which would make it a constitutional right to have a clean environment and a safe environment here in Maine, and make sure that environmental change and climate change is on the table for every policy discussion. Have a listen. Hi, and welcome to Maine Challenge. This week, we're going to talk about something that affects every single one of us, that is on all of our minds a lot of the time, and for people who work in our natural resources industry, it is their daily life, and that is the issue of climate change. I am happy to welcome to the show Andy Burt and Michelle Henkin, who are the co-founders of the Pine Tree Amendment Coalition and have been working as environmental advocates for a very long time and have been just incredibly stalwart advocates at the State House for the Pine Tree Amendment. So welcome, Michelle. Welcome, Andy. Thank you for being on the Maine Challenge.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So let's just start. Michelle, let me start with you. So explain to people what the Pine Tree Amendment actually is and what it would do.
So the Pine Tree Amendment is an amendment to the Maine State Constitution. It would establish the right to a clean and healthy environment for all people in Maine, including future generations. The important thing about it being a constitutional amendment is that it would sit in Article 1 of the Declaration of Rights in the Maine Constitution. That's the section that is about what rights are reserved to the people. What are the things that government cannot infringe upon? So it's like the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion. Whereas the rest of the Constitution is how government shall govern. So that's the really important thing. This is a right that each of us would have to a clean and healthy environment, and the government would be constitutionally obligated to protect the natural resources for the benefit of all people in Maine, and that would include future generations.
Wow. Okay. So Andy, I know you have been an environmental advocate for a very long time in Maine. So first of all, let me know, so before we talk about the Pine Tree Amendment, talk to me about your worry about climate change. Like why you're spending all your time. I know you're spending so much time on this. Why are you spending all this time? What level, where are we in terms of the climate crisis as you see it?
Oh, wow. Well, I started working on climate change in 2000. And it's interesting, Betsy, it was, I actually started working the very day that my first grandchild was born. And I have been at it in the grassroots, working with people in the environmental community as well as in the faith community on this issue. I feel like as you read the headlines, we are really in trouble. We've got to move fast. And I feel it's what Al Gore said back when he made his film, that we have the solutions, we just don't have the will. And so from what I see it as a challenge is, how do you generate that will? How do you generate the inspiration for people to be out in the streets, to be in the State House, to be everywhere, making the change that's required? Yeah. I know that isn't getting into the weeds of it, but I think it's really important. It's exactly what the youth are saying. We have a climate emergency, and the house is on fire. Yeah. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to use a squirt bottle, or are you going to bring everybody in, bring the whole all the fire departments from all over.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So that's great. So tell us about the process of what has to happen in the State House in order for this to actually get to the Constitution, or let's talk about that first.
Right. As a constitutional amendment, the bill will need a 2/3 majority in the House and then in the Senate. If it receives 2/3 in both, then it will proceed to a referendum in November, and it will be a statewide referendum, and the people will have a chance to vote.
So what are people saying when you talk with people who are opponents for a minute? What are they saying to you? What's the rationale?
So I think I don't know that I could say there's a rationale. I could say there's a fear.
Okay, that's
and
good.
the fear is that it will, because the language is broad, because it's a constitutional amendment, and if you look at the Declaration of Rights, all the language is broad. It needs to be in order to preserve that intrinsic right. So the concern is that it will lead to a lot of litigation. Okay. We're lucky that an amendment like this lives in the Pennsylvania and Montana constitutions and has just been passed in New York. That was just this last November. So there isn't a lot of precedent there. But in Pennsylvania and Montana, we see that the amendment is used when issues rise to the level of a constitutional violation. So it's a high hurdle. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, people have a right to hold government accountable. Okay. So this does not lead to endless litigation and cases, being brought willy-nilly and frivolously. The important thing to also note is that this is not something that can ever be brought against a person or a corporation. This is solely to hold government accountable at all levels of government. So it's agencies, town level. It's not neighbor against neighbor.
Okay.
And so we find that there aren't lots of lawsuits, and the main goal is actually to act as a proactive impetus for government to act in a thoughtful manner, so that as a constitutional obligation, they need to take environmental impacts into consideration as they're making laws, as they're permitting projects. And so it adds just that extra weight, that extra obligation to, and that promotes better decision making, and we don't end up with problems that we have to clean up. When there are violations, there is recourse, which we also don't currently have. So it feels to us like a very common sense measure to take, especially at a time like this.
And Barb, I'm sorry, Andy, what are you feeling? Like, what are you feeling that the fear is? In addition to litigation, are you finding still that there are people who are saying, it's not really real, or have we passed that hurdle?
I think it's just hard for people to embrace, but we have to really start thinking. We really need to be thinking about the vision of what it is we want. And I think everybody in their heart wants clean water, clean air. They want an environment in which their descendants will thrive. And that's what this amendment actually leads to.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's also the fear of what is this going to cost us? And I think it's exactly, if we look at what we're looking at, for example, with PFAS, the kinds of dollars that the legislature and our state is looking at to remediate that problem. What if from the beginning we had really listened and looked more closely at the research that was out there, the science that was out there about PFAS, about these toxics? I think the more that we can look at this as an economic, unfortunately, we're always putting that gold bar on the scale versus the earth. I come back to that image in Al Gore's film. I thought that was really powerful.
Well, and Michelle, talk for a minute about the economics of it, because as Andy said, the cleanup, to the mitigation of things often is way more expensive than at the back end than front end. So do you hear economic arguments, and do you think that's real, or is it sort of some other more fundamental thing?
As we've gone around talking to people in the state of Maine, what we found is a high level of support, and a high level of support from businesses, whether they're in the tourism industry and they rely on the image of Maine and the actuality of Maine being a beautiful place to visit, or whether it's businesses that benefit from the fact that it's a wonderful place to live and that people come here and shop with them. They're all in support because they recognize that in Maine, the economy and the environment are inextricably linked. That doesn't even mention all the industries that rely on the natural resources here, whether it's fishing or timbering or farming. I mean, they're all really reliant on Maine's environment. And so if we don't protect the environment, we feel like there's a real risk to the economy.
Yeah.
And in Pennsylvania, it's not like business has stopped. There's plenty of business going on in Pennsylvania, plenty of development going on in Pennsylvania. This is not meant to stop development. This is meant to have it go forth in a thoughtful, sustainable way to make sure that the economic interests and the environmental impacts are both at the table at the same time, and good decisions can be made.
Right, it's putting it on the table. So let's talk about the juggernaut, right? So we have this crisis, as you've described it. We have a vast support among a whole wide variety of people in Maine, and then in the middle is this juggernaut, right? That is the legislature, where you have to pass this pretty high hurdle of 2/3, and so let's talk about what it's going to take, and what you're finding, about actually getting to 2/3 in the House and in the Senate.
Well, I think one of the things, Betsy, that we've tried to do is to bring the voices of Maine people to legislators, and we've done that in a number of ways. Letters, but we've done sector letters, which is from looking at why Pine Tree Amendment is important from the perspective of many different people in different walks of life and in different generations. Mm-hmm. So we got 1,200 signatures over a very short time from people in Maine around that. I think we've also tried through visual, through imagery, not even so much through words, but with our yard signs and lawn art and humor. Mm-hmm. And other ways to really try to get through past that juggernaut, and to say people from all walks of life here in Maine think this is a really good idea. Now, some legislators pay attention to what their constituents care about, and we're finding that some maybe not so much. And so I think we've been on a learning curve around that. And I don't know, I guess I feel like the juggernaut is maybe getting smaller, but
good.
That's my hopeful side of me.
That's awesome. And I think, and just curious, in the other states, did they also have to go through the legislative process? Do you know? Okay. And so they were able to do that. So hopefully won't need to become an election issue, right? And for people saying, that this is a high enough level of priority, and so I think that's where we are. And I think that if there were ever two people that were working so hard to make legislators aware of what their constituent wants, and also helping constituents understand how they can be involved and how they can actually make this happen for this fundamental right. This very, as you said, it's a fundamental right. It's not a how we govern. It's a why we govern. This is a why for our democracy and for our democracy in Maine. So thank you both so much for the work that you're doing. We look forward to hearing how it goes, and I'm pretty sure that if this doesn't go through this time, that you're going to stick with it. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully, I mean, I know time is of the essence, right? So we're close. Remember that clock that used to be for how close we are to midnight? I know we're very close to midnight. So I'm wishing you best success, and hopefully everyone will get behind it and do the right thing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I am pleased to welcome to the Maine Challenge Margaret Archibald from Thornton Academy and Audrey Huffnagel from Lincoln Academy, two young people who have been spending a lot of their time on the Pine Tree Amendment and dealing with climate change. So thank you both very much for joining us on Maine Challenge this morning. We really appreciate it. So Margaret, let me start with you. So what is it about what's happening with the climate, happening in our environment, that is really propelling you, that gets you fueled up and fired up to do something about it? What do you see that's so alarming?
I mean, like many youth, I do sports and different activities that are pretty seasonal dependent. So skiing, for instance, we saw that the season started later, it ended sooner. Snow isn't able to be maintained throughout the season because temperatures are fluctuating so quickly that the snow conditions just don't last. Man-made products, either whether that be snow or in other more like summer-oriented activities, have to be made. The earth isn't able to supply the materials that we used to rely on so heavily. So you'll see a lot of like the ski industry has to produce significantly more snow than they used to. And that's just concerning in terms of is something that has changed since I started skiing when I was a lot younger, so around 3. So we're seeing a change in how long the season has lasted in 15 years, a little less than 15 years. And the fact that the season has changed so significantly and that the texture and all of these other aspects of skiing in Maine have changed so significantly in just a little over a decade is really concerning to me. And it plucks your heartstrings a little bit, because something that was so important to me growing up, now I question if my younger siblings are going to be able to have the same experiences. And I mean, you also see that, I also scuba dive. So you're seeing an issue with species either coming closer to shore, sharks that you now have to worry about, that you didn't quite have to worry about as frequently, very close to shore. You see you have different characteristics in the water. And then a lot of species that you used to be able to see, you can't anymore. I mean, and you also hear about that in the fishing industry, just shrimp and different species having to migrate. So I get the honor of being able to experience Maine's environment in so many different ways, and it's rapidly changing, and it's our fault, really. There are a lot of things that we could do that are impacting these changes, and it's scary because it means that other people won't be able to experience the same Maine environment that I did, and that was so important to me growing up.
And it's happening so fast, right? And you're
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Audrey, how about you? What is it that you get most concerned about that's fueling you?
Yeah, well, I also see a lot of change in my community with the changing winters, and winters are warmer. There's less snow, and that impacts my community. There's been an increase in lots more tick-borne illness, other invasive species that are able to survive in the warmer climates, which is hurting the natural ecosystems. In my town, our back parking lot, right on our main street, is almost at sea level. So when there are big storms and also a sea level rise, it's causing it to flood a lot more often, which is hurting downtown businesses. So I'm seeing it a lot on the local level, but I see it on the global level. Like when I turn on the news and there's a hurricane that's been devastating homes, or wildfires in California, all that stuff, I see that, and it just is a bigger. It's an indicator of how much this is affecting everyone on a global level. And I feel like I have a younger brother. I have cousins who I'm really close to. I'm very close to my cousins, and a lot of them are much younger. And I think about like what how this is going to impact them, and what kind of future are they going to be able to have given the speed that the climate crisis is escalating at, and just how much of an impact it's going to have.
Yeah. So I really feel both the passion, but also the urgency. And so, Margaret, do you think we're moving fast enough? Are we doing enough?
There are a lot of aspects to that answer. And I think that a lot of at least youth climate anxiety that's happening is that we don't know if the most that we can give towards advocating and taking action will be enough. It's almost impossible to know if we can stop it, or it's probably not likely that we'll be able to reverse it. But we're at a crucial point in stepping up, taking action, and starting that conversation, because the most we can do ever will be if we take action now and we start now. And when we're doing that, and Maine is definitely stepping up to that challenge. So I'm very hopeful that that's something we can achieve at some point.
Yeah. So Audrey, where do your friends see sort of where the responsibility is, and how we got here? And, I'm just curious what their thoughts are about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that actually, it's kind of an issue that there are a lot of kids who don't understand how much of an issue this is.
Okay.
There's a lot of people my age who either don't have access to the proper information to understand that, or just don't want to understand that, because it's such a big issue, and it's scary.
Yeah.
And once I understood what a big issue this was, I couldn't not do anything.
Right. If I really pay attention to this, then I'm going to have to do something, and I don't want to do anything, or I got too much else to do. Is that part of it?
Yeah, I think that may be part of it. And I definitely think that it's important to educate more young people about not only the issue, but what they can do about it.
Yeah.
Because it is a big, scary issue, and just knowing about it and not knowing what to do about it can be really hard. That caused me a lot of anxiety when I was first understanding what the climate crisis was. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important to make sure to educate other young people so that they can understand the impacts.
Yeah. So Margaret, what works when you're talking to your friends? Is it facts? Is it how it impacts their life? When you're trying to talk to someone and say, hey, no, we really need to pay attention to this. What is it that you find that works?
I found that it's relating it back to the community that we're all sharing. Mm-hmm. I found that a lot of times if you give facts and you give the bigger picture, people think that it's such a big issue that nothing they will do could ever make a dent in that. So what's the point in starting? But when you relate it back to the direct community, so really important environmental areas within my hometown of Saco that the schools in Saco have always related back to, Saco Heath, our school campus, the changes that we're seeing in our direct community that we all feel personally attached to and we don't want to see change. Our towns, the areas surrounding us, the beaches, we're really close. How is this changing those direct and kind of localized areas? And then what change can you do on that smaller scale that does really, in the end, impact the greater issue? And that's how I found it's the best way to get people engaged, and also relate to the issue and then relate to the solution, because that's another aspect, is how do we get people to feel like they can be part of a solution, and how can we apply this, and also enable kids to take action in their communities. So you look at how so a lot of people swim, a lot of people ski, a lot of people have all of these activities that they can do either across Maine or in their local communities. And how do we show them that this is an issue that's affecting the things that they do? And then looking at that, how can we work together to find a solution? And I found that is worth so much more than statistics, and even the global look that you can take, because it is really scary to look at wildfires and hurricanes. And that's an issue that some people start to clam up because they feel that kind of environmental crisis anxiety. But at the same time, we don't often experience those exact circumstances up here in Maine. So how can we experience those and apply what's happening out there to our communities? And then how can we create a solution together?
Yeah. How about you, Audrey? Any magic trick that you have that gets people to say, "Oh yeah, you know what? You're right."
Well, I would agree with Margaret, like having small local things and small things that people can do. In my school, we have a climate action club, and I was able to get a lot of them involved with the Pine Tree Amendment, helping put together packages of these sector letters that had been collected, that had signatures of a bunch of people from across the state. And there were so many people who were really enthusiastic about it and excited to help. So I think that like having little things that people can do and ways that they can help, like that really helps people get engaged. And when people know what they can do, like they are happy to be engaged.
Oh, that's awesome. So let's talk about the Pine Tree Amendment in our last couple minutes. So big thing, constitutional change. Margaret, what gives you hope about the importance of the Pine Tree Amendment itself?
I was really drawn to the Pine Tree Amendment because not only was it addressing a lot of the kind of environmental concerns that I had in Maine and things that could be done to help the issues I was seeing in Maine, but the language directly references future generations. So I was initially really drawn to it because by putting this amendment in the state constitution, you're guaranteeing these environmental rights have to be at the forefront of discussions for future generations, not just for the government that we have in office right now. And like Audrey says, we all know young people that are even younger than us that are going to inherit this government and this state someday. And I want to make sure that they get to have similar experiences to what I had, because in Maine, the environment is so crucial to everyone's childhood. Everyone's childhood was surrounded by Maine in a variety of ways, whether that be its identity or its physical environment. So this amendment, it does at first was a little, you had to wrap your head around it. Okay, we're going to change Maine's constitution. That's a big deal. But looking into it and educating myself on it and then becoming a part of it, this is really crucial to make sure that Maine's environment, which is so key to both of its identity, its economy, a way of life in Maine, it will be protected, and it has to be present in conversations. And the environment can no longer be ignored. And the impact that humans, Mainers, whether they be out of town, visiting, or residents here, the impact that we are all having on Maine's environment has to be at the forefront of discussions on a government and local level, which was just a massive approach. And I think that it's really important to how we proceed forward, recognizing these changes are happening and we don't want them to continue happening.
Yeah. So Audrey, did you ever think that you were going to work on changing Maine's constitution?
I didn't particularly think that I would, but I mean, I think it is a really important thing to put the right to a healthy environment in the Constitution, because with laws, they can be passed and repealed, but the right to a healthy environment, it's because we rely on the environment to be healthy. We rely on clean air and clean water to survive. So it's very much a fundamental right, and I think it's very important that it's recognized as such. And so by putting it in the Constitution, that feels like a really important foundational thing and a really big step to protecting Maine's environment for future generations and for everyone who currently lives here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, unbelievably, we're out of time. So thank you for what you're doing. I look forward to hearing how this all works out. And I know that even whether it passes this time or not, we still have work to do. And I'm looking forward to your leadership in all of that work. So thank you for joining us on Maine Challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you.